Ready? Okay, great.
Hi.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Hi,
Yes.
hi.
Yes.
Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm C. Gatchalian. I'm the uh, guest 2S LGBTQIA plus curator for Word Vancouver this year. I'm also involved with this anthology that we are going to be talking a little bit about today. Um, I just want to acknowledge that this festival takes place on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Um, and I'd like to pay tribute to the nation's storytellers, these nation's storytellers who continue to pave the way for all of us. Um, some thank yous are in order. A special thank you to Connects UBC, the UBC Library, and UBC Robson Square for their sponsorship, which made the space available to us. We'd like to take a moment to thank our generous festival donors and sponsors, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Canada Heritage Fund, BC Gaming, Creative BC, the City of Vancouver, DBVIA, the Hamber Foundation, the Joseph Wask Foundation, the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, C. Will Pace and Associates, the Federation of BC Writers, the League of Canadian Poets, and the Writers Union of Canada. For a full list of our partners, please visit our website, wordvancouver.ca. Without you, this free festival could not happen. So if you haven't already, please consider making a donation via Word Vancouver's website. So welcome to Invisible No More, Filipino Words. As I alluded to just a minute ago, I'm involved. I'm actually one of the co-editors for an anthology that's coming out from Cormorant Press in November called Magdaragat. It's an anthology of Filipino-Canadian literary writing. It's the first, I believe, it's the very first such anthology to be published by a commercial press. So it's a pretty landmark event in Canadian literature, and it's coming at a time when the Filipino population in Canada is fast approaching 1 million. So it's timely, to say the least. So it's been a great joy to be part of the editorial team for this anthology. I'm joined today by my two wonderful co-editors, Teodoro Alcuitas on the left, and um, joining us from Chagaronto or Toronto, Patria Rivera. So we're the editorial
Hi.
team for Magdaragat. Um, and Leah Ranada here is one of the contributors to the anthology, and they will all be reading from their contributions in just a moment. So yeah, so that moment is now. So no further, without further ado, we'll start the readings. We're gonna start with Leah Ranada. Uh, Leah Ranada's writing is informed by her childhood in Metro Manila and eventual move to Vancouver in 2006, where she made writing her permanent home. In, two, in 2013, she attended the Writers Studio at SFU. She released her debut novel, The Cine Star Salon, published by New West Press in 2021, and is very honored to have her story included in Magdaragat, an anthology of Filipino-Canadian writing, once again coming out from Cormorant Books in November. Leah's works have also been published in On Spec, Room Magazine, Santa Ana River Review, and elsewhere. So please welcome Leah Ranada.
Thank you. Thank you so much, CE. Can people hear me? Yes? Yeah, my voice is kind of soft, so I like to check. So like I said, I'm very honored to be a part of this anthology and also of this event. Thank you so much for coming in here and to those who are connected remotely. So I'm reading the first few pages of my short story in the anthology called Foragers. The tiki torches are Papa's idea, even though he hates everything capricious. Iris has never been to Boracay, he says by way of explanation. And I barely stop myself from saying, neither have we. The flames make the hot June evening hotter. The hedges around Iris's small backyard crackle in the sweltering air. She looks like Kate Blanchett, Paula says. I glare at my older brother until he realizes how weird he is, gushing about Papa's new girlfriend. But the night has started out weird anyway. I showed up at Iris's townhouse, 4 on the dot, finding Paolo practicing card tricks in the living room, our fathers taking torches in the backyard. Iris was still at work. When she arrived, it seemed like she knew something was up. My father had provided just enough hints to intrigue, but she had not anticipated the presence of his children in her home. Her smile was wide and stiff when Papa introduced us, his voice booming with pride. I excused myself to the kitchen, her kitchen, and busied myself mincing herbs on the marble countertop, picking up any bits that strayed from the chopping board. Paolo bowed and started performing card tricks. Iris relaxed. She laughed throatily, her smooth, wintry face alight, when a coin disappeared in Paolo's hands and he plucked it from behind her ear. I'm speechless. Can you do it again? The bay window overlooking the backyard frames Papa and Iris perfectly. A torch at the end of each table, pearly white tablecloth and serviettes, on which Papa has set Iris's Noritake dining set and crystal wine glasses. I have picked the bottle of rosé sitting in an ice bucket near the tall, clear vase of sunflowers. The blooms face the aquamarine bar of Jericho Beach beyond the hedge. They are working on my first course, arugula salad with oranges, pomegranate seeds, and goat cheese. My father puts down his fork whenever Iris speaks. They met a month ago at a health and wellness convention where Papa was selling an herbal supplement that improves everything from hair follicles to the digestive tract. Since Mama kicked him out 2 years ago, we have lost count of the odd jobs. It is easier to track the short term girlfriends. A waitress at a sushi joint, a biker he met at a lakeside retreat, the aspiring singer selling her CDs along Commercial Drive. I turned to Paulo. How long do you think she'll last? He doesn't answer, just look around the kitchen, at the matching stainless steel refrigerator and stove, upholstered stools along the breakfast bar, a curio cabinet housing 3 different kinds of porcelain tea sets. Iris is different from all the others. Papa was waiting for me outside the campus last week. His press clothes told me he had the job. The clean nails hinted at a girlfriend. When will you get the phone? I told him. Is that the hello I get from my little girl? He offered to treat me at a nearby cafe where I ordered the most expensive latte. On the small TV overhead, there was a news story about Muhammad Ali's funeral. The camera panned a bird's eye view over the slow procession on the streets of Louisville. People cheered, waved American flags, threw flowers at the hearse. Muhammad Ali liked magic, I told Papa as we waited for our drinks. Huh? He had a personal magician who taught him some tricks. Paolo told me. Just like her dim brother to believe stories like that. As we sipped our drinks, Papa didn't tell me he was in love or that he needed my help to impress a new girlfriend. Instead, he told me he was proud of me for pursuing my passion. Culinary arts. I've always known you have my fine tastes. He mentioned a new restaurant by the seawall where he would take me one day. To be heaped upon with such expression of fatherly pride and adoration was as strange as it was rare, stirring a yearning I didn't know I have. And that's how I ended up in Whole Foods this afternoon, buying ingredients for a romantic 3-course dinner for two. Beside me, Paulo checks his watch. My shift starts at 8. He glances at the scene outside, wondering when he could shed his damask vest, dark pants, and button down shirt for his 7-Eleven uniform. His long sleeves are folded from the wrist up to prove he has nothing to hide. You're leaving me here with them? He frowns. You planning to be here all night? We don't talk about Mama, who is probably just starting her overnight shift at the geriatric ward downtown. I have plenty of men in my life, she jokes during breakfast of spam and fried eggs before heading to bed. She talks about octogenarians whom she has to undress and help to their bathroom routines, whose loose skin and aching joints she massages with pain relief ointments and topical hydrocortisone. I sometimes wish I worked with her to ease her nightly burden and perhaps harden my own shell against the sight of our proud, able bodied father turning dingy and thinning. To Mama, he is more helpless than her aging patients. Our conversation at the cafe last week annoyed me, but also left me feeling vaguely hopeful. Our father has had many girlfriends. He has asked Paulo and me for favors before, but he has never asked a favor about a girlfriend. It was Iris who made him do it, pushed him past the comfort level. Who knows what else is possible? Life has been known to offer or to allow miracles. Out there in the fairy tale backyard, our father is already behaving like a better man, well dressed and well spoken. He calls Paulo for another trick. He does so with a snap of fingers, as if summoning a well trained butler. My brother, grateful for any willing audience, grins and heads outside. He spreads his deck of cards in a fan on the table before Iris. Main course is roasted bass and asparagus. Iris is a healthy eater, according to Papa. Will he change his ways for her, or will she lay a path on which to guide him through? Ever since we reunited with Mama from Manila, it has seemed as if Papa doesn't know what to do with himself. He refuses to work for anyone, but he doesn't have the networks here that helped his printing business back home. The foul words he called out as form of affection to friends have become just foul words. The way he squared his shoulders during an argument is now just hollow swagger. His behavior around Iris hits me with a strange kind of homesickness, as if we are back home and we are children again, except that he has transported this strange woman with us while Mama is out on some prolonged errand. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Leah. Our next reader is Teodoro Alcuitas. Teodoro Ted Alcuitas is editor and publisher of PhilippineCanadianNews.com, the first and only online newspaper linking the Filipino diaspora in Canada. A longtime community journalist that spans 4 decades, starting when he started. Let's try it again. He is a longtime community journalist and whose career spans 4 decades, starting when he started the first Filipino newspaper, Silangan in Western Canada in 1976. Please welcome Teodoro Alcuitas.
Thank you, Chris, for that convoluted introduction. Thank you. Uh, as Chris mentioned, this is the first time I've tried to regain my name as Teodoro. For all my lifetime in Canada, for more than 50 years, my name, I have been known as Ted. It's colonized. So this is the first time that I've used my full name, Teodoro. And it's appropriate that it appears in this book. So I'll be reading excerpts from my piece in the book entitled "Accidental Journalist." I was drifting in my career as an architect after working in Canada with my family after arriving in Canada with my family in 1968. unlike most immigrants, was lost in the new country. Unlike them, I was hungry for news from the motherland. The only means of news were by mail from relatives or the television, as the internet had not been invented yet. There were no Filipino newspapers in Canada at the time. The idea of starting a newspaper came when I saw high school students pasting and assembling their high school paper one day. And on a whim, I decided to do a newspaper with my brother-in-law. We agreed to name the paper Silangan because it embodied our vision. Silangan in Filipino is where the sun rises, the east. We wanted the newspaper to be a beacon to our community, to inspire them to greater heights. From the beginning, our goal was clear. The paper was to be a voice and a beacon, and not just a mere chronicler of events. The first issue of the 24-page tabloid came out in February 1976, and it became a sensation. The excitement of the first issue was like expecting a first baby. It was a labor of love for me, as I had to do most of the work running the paper, and I neglected my selling job. I did not have the foggiest idea about the basics of journalism, except the bare five W's: who, what, when, where, and why. So I had to learn it on the run, on my own. Published once a month, Silangan became a staple of the community. People eagerly awaited copies at grocery stores and other outlets. It was distributed free, and whatever little income it generated from ads was just enough to cover printing costs. I was becoming increasingly restless when the paper existed for 5 years, and I sold it because I could no longer handle the pressure of running and financing the paper. So in 1981, I sold the paper to a group of Filipinos in Winnipeg, and they continued the paper, although they changed the name to the Filipino Journal. So it is still existing right now, probably the oldest print newspaper in Canada, Filipino newspaper in Canada. But when I saw the paper, I was becoming increasingly restless over not being able to write about the Philippines situation, because at the time, in 1981, most Filipinos would know Senator Benigno Aquino was assassinated by President Marcos, the father of the current president in the Philippines. So I thought of venturing into another publication precisely because I was prohibited by my sale of the Silangan to not compete within 2 years. It was only after 2 years I was able to start another paper, and I called it Kalayaan. It was an appropriate name because the Philippines was fighting for its freedom at that time. So defying traditional journalistic standards, I reluctantly took up the leadership of the anti-Marcos movement that formed in Winnipeg soon after the Aquino assassination on August 21, 1983. The August 21 movement was the vanguard of the anti-Marcos opposition in Canada. Kalayaan had a busy time covering the series of events in the city that included the visits of Agapito Bots Aquino, brother of the slain senator, and other Philippine personalities. When Kalayaan carried advertising from the Bank of Nova Scotia, I was asked by the local anti-apartheid group if I was willing to withdraw the bank's ad as it was doing business in South Africa. It was a lucrative contract for a small newspaper like mine, but I did not hesitate to cancel it in support of the anti-apartheid movement. The paper exposed the extravagance of the Philippine government in maintaining a large consulate in Winnipeg. A poor country like the Philippines did not need to rent a whole floor of a downtown office building and employ 10 people. I compared it to the Japanese consulate, which occupied only a quarter of the space in the same building. The story was picked up by the Winnipeg Free Press and the controversy erupted. Soon after, the consulate was closed. I bore the brunt of the blame for its closure from some people in the community. My expose perhaps contributed to the consulate's demise, although it was a decision made by the Philippine government. But it was in issues related to racism that I found myself most embroiled. The indigenous community and people of color were fair game for the mainstream media, and headlines scream of crimes allegedly committed by them. I cannot understand why only indigenous people and people of color were identified in crime reporting. Our race was always identified, while the race of people of European ancestry was not. I helped organize a meeting with mainstream media and community leaders to discuss the issue of racialized reporting of crime news in the city. Media representative argued that there was no racism in the reporting. The identification of race was germane to the story. One incident involving some Filipinos during Folklorama was reported by the Winnipeg Sun, whose headlines scream Filipinos in fracas, and whose articles warn of potential trouble during Folklorama, a practice of sensationalizing news involving people of color. This happened after our meeting with media representatives, and I thought if the media will not respond to our concerns, maybe we should hurt them in their own pocketbook. I called for a boycott of the paper and asked some people to call and cancel their subscription. Some Filipino mothers called the Winnipeg Sun to tell them that their boys would no longer be distributing the paper if the discriminatory practice continued. Corner stores that sold the paper also called to say that they would stop selling the Sun. The editor of the time, Kelly Armstrong, called and asked me to hold up on my call for a boycott. I said it was too late, as Kalayaan was on its way to the printers with my editorial for a boycott on it. The move prompted an editorial response from the Sun, explaining their side. It was the first time a major newspaper outlet in the city had acknowledged their actions, which was a major victory for the Filipino community. I thought of expanding Kalayaan to other communities in Winnipeg in the hope of increasing circulation. The paper became a magazine, and I named it Mosaic to reflect the diversity of the city. Personalities that were featured included Elijah Harper, the first indigenous member of the Manitoba legislature, and Evelyn Lau, the acclaimed Chinese Canadian poet and author. But despite my efforts, however, the publication did not become a viable financial operation and folded after a year. I moved to the West Coast in 1992 and was invited to write for different publications here in town. Uh, in early 2009, I tried to revive Silangan with the first tabloid issue in April. It lasted for 10 issues until January 2010. I have to close it. I then moved to the Philippine Asian News Today as senior editor, but in 2014, I left the newspaper and started my own current website, the Philippine Canadian News.com. Today, at 83 years old, I'm still doing what I love to do, telling and sharing the stories of our community. We haven't reached 1 million views yet, but I will keep writing with that goal in mind, one click at a time. Working for 46 years as an accidental journalist in Canada has not always been easy, but I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I am truly grateful that I have chosen this path. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Salamat, Teodoro. Our final reader is another member, the third member of the editorial team, Patria Rivera, Filipino-Canadian poet, writer, and editor. Patria Rivera's first poetry collection, Puti, published by Frontenac House Media in 2005, was shortlisted for the 2006 Canadian Trillium Book Award for Poetry. She has also published 3 other books of poetry: The Bride Anthology, also from Frontenac House Media, B Signature Editions in 2011, and The Time Between, also from Signature Editions, published in 2018, as well as co-authored 2 chapbooks, Weathering an Exchange of Poems from Silver Maple Press, and Sixth from the Sixth, published in 2001. In fall 2023, Magdaragat, an anthology of Filipino-Canadian writing, a book Rivera co-edited, will be released by Cormorant Books. Rivera's poetry is featured in Oxford University Press's Perspectives in Ideology and in Ilana Wolf's Implicate Me, short essays on reading contemporary poems. Rivera has received fellowships from the Writers' Union of Canada, the Banff Centre for the Arts, and the Hawthornden Castle International Writers Retreat Centre in Scotland. She was also a recipient of the Global Filipino Literary Award for Poetry. Born and raised in the Philippines, Rivera graduated with a journalism degree from the University of the Philippines. So please welcome Patria Rivera.
Thank you, Chris. It is amazing to be with you and our other co-editor, Ted, who shared his exploits as an accidental journalist, and Leah Ranada for sharing her poignant story about the disaster dinner with the reunited father and daughter. I will be reading the first few pages from my contribution to the anthology, and it will hint at what has happened before and what was going to happen in the future in terms of our life as a family. Okay. Landing and arrival, a map of no return. 1. The ugly face of fear. Fear drove us out of our homeland. The constant nagging fear that on any day, at any hour, some frenzied military soldier would put the whole country on hold, declare a mini coup, forever shatter the fragile peace we knew under the Marcos dictatorship. Marcos had placed the Philippines under the dragnet of martial rule on September 21, 1972, ostensibly to keep the peace. Proclamation 1081 suspended civil rights and imposed military authority in the country. The directive effectively barred mass demonstrations and rallies against the regime's inaction to ease poverty in cities and on farms, improve abject working conditions, and end corruption in the government. The military incarcerated labor, farm, and student leaders who led mass protests on the streets of Manila and in other parts of the country. Although the government was ousted from power after 2 decades, when protest masses and mass rallies in the mid 1980s galvanized effective opposition to the government, the country continued to experience only restive peace. That was the point at which my husband and I decided we could not live with any more uncertainty. Our 4 daughters were growing up. We did not want them to suffer and live the rest of their lives knowing the ugly face of fear. We would move to Canada, we decided. 2. 6 suitcases and a map of no return. 6 suitcases. My husband Joe and I decided we needed just 6 suitcases to emigrate from the Philippines in the summer of 1987. Although staff at the Canadian Embassy in Makati, the financial and commercial hub in Metro Manila, said we could send over household items and furniture free of freightage, we opted to travel light. Our journey would be a clean break. No baggage from our past, just our clothes, shoes, and some money in the bank to ride us over in the first few months. We had earlier sold our house, so there would be no home to go back to. We were homeless and propertyless now. It would be with a certain sense of premonition and irony that 1987 also inaugurated the International Year of Shelter for the Homeless. Since we will begin our first day in our adopted country without a home, without any next of kin, and just the shirts on our backs. At the same time, we were heartened that at the beginning of the year, uh, astronomers at the University of California took first sight of the first birth of a galaxy. We had bought one-way tickets only. There was neither a looking back nor a going back. 6 suitcases, one each for me and my husband, one each for our daughters, Jenny, Kim, Isabel, and Rani. Our 2 older daughters were in their teens, 14 and 13, and our 2 younger ones, 8 and 6. How do you live a past lived for more than 30 years in a suitcase? How do you determine which item or belonging to keep? Or which memento or memorabilia mean the most to you and your family? Our decisions were fraught with risk and uncertainty, but were founded on what we knew we wanted most for our family: some peace of mind, a good education for our children, a family life centered on simplicity. Although my husband and I were both gainfully employed and enjoyed thriving careers in Manila, our lives were forever on the brink of the next coup or the next bombing, or prey to any and all of the stresses and dislocations that seethe and fraud over the cities and towns, small and big, in our old country. In January 1987, government forces fired at a group of farmers on their way to Malacanang Palace in Manila to protest the lack of government action on land reform. In June, 17 civilians suspected to be members of a rebel group were reported to have been killed by army soldiers in Lupao, a town near the foot of the Caraballo Mountains in Nueva Ecija. We chose to follow the map to the door of no return, a map that navigated rivers, mountains, and oceans 10,000 miles away from where our home once stood. We left our homeland with its storied 7,641 islands, a cacophony of voices and cultures that spoke in 186 languages, two of them now dead, a diverse flora and fauna, and the uncertain dangers of the Pacific Ring of Fire, making it vulnerable to typhoons and earthquakes. In January 1987, Frobisher Bay in the Northwest Territories changed its name to Iqaluit. Iqaluit is now the capital of Nunavut, the newest, largest, and most northerly territory of Canada. On June 30 that year, Canada introduced its $1 coin, which locals quickly nicknamed the loonie. By early July of that year, we had said our goodbyes to siblings and their children, and close relatives and friends. It was like experiencing a death in the family. My parents had died within a year of each other. My father in 1985, my mother in 1986. Joe had lost both his parents years earlier. They had been our anchor. Their loss meant breakage from our roots, our past. We felt like orphans needing to heal. We were saddened but determined and ready to live for good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Patty. All right, so let's chat. So my first question is for Teodoro. Um, this anthology is kind of your baby, you know. Uh, you came to. I mean, I came to the project later. Patria came to the project later, but it was in your hands for a while before before it came to us. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the gestation of the book.
Yeah, this book is a long journey. It started, actually, it was the late Jim Wong Chu, the founder of the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop in Vancouver, and the publisher of the Rice Paper magazine, who inspired me and kept prodding me to write an anthology for Filipinos. I have known James for maybe 10 years at the time, and he kept asking me to, why don't you write an anthology? And as I said in my accidental journalist piece, I did not feel confident to write a book. I didn't know what is an anthology. I have to Google how do you write an anthology. So that was maybe in 2015 when this idea started. So James, as you know, he was a very persistent person. You know, those who know him will attest to that. He never gave up. So I keep pushing him back. Said, Jim, I don't know how to do this. And eventually he said, Ted, you don't have to do it on your own. You can ask other people to help you edit it. So I said, oh, well, that makes it a little easier. So I broached the idea to, I don't know how many people I can remember, you know, if they want to work with me. And somehow nobody took the offer until I met this guy, Chris. So I sort of knew Chris in my research, the rice papers. This must be Filipino writer. So I wanted to interview him, but that interview was cancelled. Later on, we agreed to meet for coffee. But, it was a rainy day in Vancouver at that chocolate house. Yeah, I can't remember. So that was the first time. So that was the first time we met. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I told Chris about the idea, and he took the bait, sort of. So it was lucky because Chris also knows how to apply for a grant. He's a grant writer, and he said, "Yeah, Ted, we can apply for a grant for it," because I didn't really know how to fund the project. So when Chris agreed to be on board, uh, we thought that it should be we should diversify our authorship. So we thought of looking for somebody in the East, and maybe I should not mention her. uh, so we ended up with Patria Rivera. Patty, I don't know her personally. We've never met, but I've read about her uh, story. I featured uh, Patty's daughter, Rani Rivera, committed suicide some years ago. And Patty discovered the whole poetry writing in the laptop that she left. That that Rani's work is included in this book. So Patty agreed to work with us. So that's how we ended. One author from Toronto and two from Vancouver. So it was this is a wild idea. We never knew what will happen with writing an anthology, and maybe if Chris would allow me. There were about 100 submissions when we called for submissions before COVID. First, the first struggle, of course, was to find a publisher. We were rejected by the first publisher, but eventually ended up with Cormorant Books in Toronto. Yeah, so Chris can add to that. But we had over almost 100 pieces submitted. It was amazing because we only relied on word of mouth. I had it in my website, and so we had to narrow it down to. At first, we decided to have 25 pieces because the publisher wanted it, smaller. But then we decided to be more inclusive and expanded it to 49 contributors. So that was that was the journey of this anthology, and I like Cresto.
Um, yeah, I just wanted to say, Teodoro, you mentioned Rani Rivera. So Rani is included in the anthology, but Rani also has a book out, her own book that was published by Caitlin Press, right? Patria, right?
Yeah,
Caitlin
yeah,
Press.
yeah, yeah.
Can't remember the name. What's the name of the book? What was the name of the book?
Rani's book.
Yeah, Rani's
Um,
book. Yeah.
uh, Everything is fuzzy with me right now. I'm overwhelmed with emotions.
Oh,
Pause.
okay. All right. Well, just yeah, Rani Rivera. Yeah, yeah. But it's published by Caitlin Press, which is a quite a well-known press based here in BC, actually. So, um, but yeah, interesting story about the publication of this book. We submitted it to the first publisher, uh, who took a few months to get back to us, and then eventually said no to it, because just for reasons having to do with anthologies generally in their experience have not sold. Weren't selling very well. Or the anthologies that they had published recently weren't selling very well, so they decided to take a hiatus on publishing anthologies. So we were a little bummed by that. But then an author friend of mine actually, suggested that we submit it to his publisher. So we did. He broached the introduction. We submitted the manuscript to Cormorant Books, which is based in Toronto. And get this, because this never happens. Less than 24 hours after we submitted it, we got an offer. So it was pretty, yeah, it was incredible, because that never happens in the literary world. So I think that's testament to how timely and needed this this book is. And yeah,
May
I
I
mean,
add something?
as Teodoro said, sorry. Oh yeah, you want to add something,
Y-
Patria? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's what a coincidence. Ronnie's book, All Violet, was published by Caitlin Press. And funny how I just emailed the publisher asking her, and on the same night, I think, she answered yes to publishing Ronnie's book when I approached her for possible publication. So I think it happened the same way with our book, Magdaragat,
Yeah,
when,
it's a
yeah,
definite, yeah. S- there's a yeah, the forces are with us. I guess
yeah,
Um, is it yeah. Um, but yeah, we got over 100. We got close to 100 submissions from coast to coast to coast, and uh, you know, we have some in terms of the anthology and who's included in the anthology. We have authors from every part of Canada. Not just the major centers like Vancouver, Toronto, but we have representation from from the Yukon and from Atlantic Canada, places where you wouldn't ordinarily think that there are necessarily a lot of Filipinos, but we're actually everywhere. We're actually everywhere. So, and I think this anthology is testament to that. Just want to check the time. Yeah, I just maybe this question is for Leah. Um, so, I mean, you're part of this anthology. Why do you think this anthology is important?
First of all, I want to thank you, Teodoro and Chris, for sharing the history of the anthology. I feel doubly honored now to be in it because of the struggles it has gone through.
mhm,
I think the anthology is very important because, especially for future generations of Philippine Canadians and other incoming Filipinos coming to the country, because it I think it makes our identity more resilient, and to see our people as part of the literary fabric. It just affirms our presence. It's not just about the visibility, it's also about claiming our memories and experience rather than Because if we don't do that ourselves, a more dominant culture will tell our stories, and it's our own stories to tell. So yeah, I think it's a very important project, and I hope this is not the last one. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Because I mean, one thing I really want to, I cannot stress enough is that this anthology that's coming out in November, it's not a comprehensive anthology. It's not meant. It doesn't include everyone. It it's impossible for any anthology to include everyone, right? So we're we're very hopeful though that there will be future anthologies that will include people who were not for various reasons included in this anthology. um, Patty, did you want to speak to this issue, why this anthology is important?
Yes, the anthology has brought out I think, the best from our young and upcoming writers. Uh, in the anthology, readers will be probably surprised about or amazed at how deep and abiding and how creative our young writers from the Filipino-Canadian community are. Uh, there's a depth that uh, you probably rarely see in other in other writings of a similar vein. And what we have found as editors is that there's that determination of the writers to project their histories, their emotions, their memories onto paper in a very creative way. So
Great.
there's a
Thanks.
lot to
Thanks,
be
Patty. Yeah,
surprised with. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, it was an eye opener reading all the submissions that came in, because there was so much genuinely, not just saying this, there was an abundance of talent and ability in the submissions that we received, from writers that we didn't know, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there was a core group of writers that we did invite to be part of the anthology from the beginning, but then we did an open call. Most of the submissions, or most of the pieces that ended up in the anthology, are were the result of this open call from writers that we didn't know. You know, um, so I think we all were kind of laboring under this idea that the Filipino Canadian writing community is tiny, but uh, it was actually much larger than we thought, than we I think originally thought it was. So um, just want to check the time. I have 6 minutes left. I want to open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions or comments. Yeah, JP. Yeah. Great. So the question was from the audience member is the question was the title and maybe you know what was the rationale for the title of the anthology, which is Magdaragat, and I'm going to pass this on to Teodoro because this was his idea. So it's your brainchild. So
Thank you. Yeah, I was responsible for the title. I was surprised by the two editors and never even questioned my suggestion. So the idea of Magdaragat came to my mind because Filipinos were traveling from our native homeland of the Philippines, even within our own islands. I came from Cebu. I traveled to Manila, from Manila to Canada, to the United States, all over. So we're all travelers by sea initially, but of course we're now traveling by air. But we're all, until now, we're still journeying. And part of the anthology is a journey. So we're all travelers. And before I want to, maybe I want not forget to acknowledge that the book is dedicated to Jim Wong Chu. A month after he died, I wrote a tribute for Jim and the Georgia Strait and made a vow that if this anthology will come, it will be for Jim.
Great, thank you. And for those of you who don't know who Jim Wong Chu was, he was a poet, an activist, an arts advocate, founder of Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, co-founder of Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, a great Vancouverite, and yeah, somebody who was an early mentor of mine as well, and so many Asian Canadian writers. Yeah, yeah, Magdaragat. I can't remember who this quote is attributed to or should be attributed to, but basically the quote is, Filipinos are mystic wanderers from the land of perpetual departures, which I love, Is that, yeah. Any other questions or comments? All right. Oh, okay, we have a couple. Oh, yeah. Yes.
Did you see any strong themes that are coming out in terms of the writing, and was there any difference in those themes based on whether the migration story, whether people were more recent immigrants or?
Yeah, in terms of, there were recurring themes. I think definitely the theme of family and especially grandparents. I think Teodoro and Patty would agree with me about that. There were many submissions that came in that had to do with lolas and lolos, grandparents. Relationships with the homeland, the balikbayan box, right?